Follow the journey of the Olympic flame in our regular news updates here on BBC World News.
This is a business edition with me, Jamie Robertson. 12 people killed when a gunman opens fire inside a cinema in the American state of Colorado. He is named as James Holmes.
There's not one of us that doesn't read or hear this story, certainly anyone who has children, and think about it being your child in that movie theater.
A bank bailout for Spain, but still the stock market plummets 6% and yields on Spanish bonds skyrocket. Plus, fears of a new global food crisis as corn and soybean prices in the US rise to record levels. They are, it seems, out of tune with the markets. Fender, makers of guitars to the legends of rock, backs away from offering shares to the public. Also coming up, the people the Chinese economic miracle left behind. We have a special report on poverty in the world's economic powerhouse. But after being ravaged by years of warfare, we look at plans to revive what used to be one of the biggest tourist attractions in the Middle East, but is no longer. Hello, welcome. One story has dominated the news today: the shootings at a midnight film screening in the United States. Police in Colorado are still attempting to search the apartment of a man suspected of shooting dead 12 cinema goers and injuring almost 60 others. It was happened at a cinema in Aurora. They've evacuated an apartment block after it was alleged that he had rigged it with sophisticated explosives. President Obama has described the shooting as senseless and beyond reason. Our correspondent Alistair Leithhead sent us this report.
It was midnight, but the cinema was packed for the very first showing of the new Batman blockbuster. The gunman burst into the theatre, opening fire into the crowds. There was panic as people were hit. Some died in their seats, others were injured as they tried to flee.
And we were right there, the fifth row from the shooter. People were scrambling left and right. My children got out first, me and my wife. We got down on our hands and knees. The people in the higher seating, in the stadium seats, they were sitting ducks.
At first I was so scared I didn't even know what to do. Like, we just ducked down under the seats.
Like, you didn't want to move because you weren't sure where he was.
It was scary. A young girl just with bullet wounds in her leg and blood just all over her is just... I don't ever want to see something like that again.
The emergency services arrived at the suburban cinema quickly, taking the injured to different hospitals across Aurora City. There have been shootings here before. Columbine, the scene of one of America's worst school shootings, is 20 miles down the road. Officers were shocked at the number of people killed and injured.
The police response consisted of rushing anyone who was hit immediately into police cars and to hospitals.
Children were among the dead and injured. Many families and young people had come to the first showing of the movie blockbuster. It was half an hour into the film when a man dressed all in black burst into the cinema wearing a gas mask and a bulletproof jacket. He looked like one of the characters in the movie, so at first people thought it was a stunt. But then came the hiss of a gas canister. Then seconds later he opened fire, shooting indiscriminately into a packed auditorium. He escaped out of the back of the cinema to his car and when challenged by police gave himself up. The white 24-year-old man was identified as James Holmes. There was still no indication of his motive. After claims there were explosives in his car, the police brought in a bomb disposal robot to search the vehicle. And SWAT teams were sent to his apartment. The whole area was evacuated. as the authorities again looked for explosives. President Obama issued a statement within hours of the attack.
Even as we learn how this happened and who's responsible, we may never understand what leads anybody to terrorize their fellow human beings like this. Such violence, such evil is senseless.
As the scale of the attack became clear, the number of people killed and injured, the investigation into what drove the gunman to do this was getting underway.
Alistair Leithhead there. Now to the business news. Just as you thought the worst was over in the global economy, confidence in the Spanish economy has vanished like the snows in the spring. Its stock market closed down almost 6%. Borrowing costs for the government hit record highs, well over 7%. It's a level Spain simply cannot afford to pay in the long term. World markets picked up that scent of fear and they turned red. And all this just as Eurozone finance ministers signed off on a loan of up to 100 billion euros for a bailout for the country's banking sector. What the financial markets fear is that the country as a whole, not just the banking sector, will need financial aid. And indeed, one of Spain's most indebted regions, Valencia, today formally asked the central government for a bailout for itself. The sense that the crisis is ramping up again was underlined by comments from the Italian Prime Minister, Mario Monti. He agreed the contagion in investor confidence has spread from Spain and elsewhere to his country as well. Joining me now is Richard Duncan, economist. He's the author of a book called The New Depression, the breakdown of the paper money economy. Richard, let's just start exactly what do you think is happening at the moment? Why are we just losing all confidence in Spain? Because in a way we thought the banking system, which everyone had talked about as being such a problem, we thought we could sort that out with this 100 billion pushed in that direction.
What I understand today is that even though the EU bailout was passed by Germany's parliament required that this money, the Spanish government be responsible for that money rather than allowing the banks to be bailed out directly through the EU bailout fund. And that means the debt of the Spanish bank, the government will be higher, and therefore the markets became spooked and the yields went higher.
Do you think it means we're going to have a bailout of the whole sovereign nation rather than just of the banking sector? I mean, this is what people are worried about.
Well, I think it's too early to conclude that there will have to be a bailout of the entire nation, but if there is, I don't think that's the end of the world. And if necessary, there will be.
Can we afford it? I say we in a fairly general term. Can Europe afford it?
Well, let's think about this. The IMF has special drawing rights. In 2009, they increased them by a factor of 10, creating $300 billion worth of SDRs. They could do that again, create another $300 billion worth of SDRs and help Spain's banks and Spain's government, and if need be, they will.
So you think there are enough, as you would call, credit-rich countries around to be able to bail out the credit-poor ones? The credit-poor ones, obviously, Spain, Italy, and Greece, and Ireland, and so on. And the credit-rich ones are obviously Germany, and the multilaterals as well, the IMF.
We have a global economy, and our global economy over the last 4 decades has been built on credit. Now, if the credit starts blowing up and starts to contract, our entire global economy is going to spiral into depression, and the policymakers understand that. So they're not going to let the debt defaults occur on a big scale, because then we would have a debt deflation death spiral, and the policy is designed to prevent that.
Yeah, just talk to me about the death spiral. How would that work? What would take me through the steps of that?
Well, credit has been driving economic growth now for 4 decades. In the U.S., total credit expanded from $1 trillion in 1964 to $50 trillion now. Now, if this suddenly reverses and the credit starts contracting through debt defaults, then the boom that it created begins to go into reverse. The credit starts to fail, therefore the banks become weaker and the banks start to fail. That way wipes out everyone's savings, and it's a death spiral. Now,
you talked a second ago about the policymakers knowing what to do. This is something which I find a lot with economists. They have the answers, or they feel they have the answers. They have the solutions, but the problem is not so much that the solutions are not valid, but the fact is the people, as represented by politicians, won't go there. They won't put their necks on the line to borrow the money, to give the money to Greece or to Italy. And that is an impasse which you can't really get by.
Well, that's why most of the central banks are independent of the politicians. And so Ben Bernanke has been taught by Milton Friedman that if the Fed could have prevented the Great Depression if it had just prevented the money supply from contracting in 1930. Now Bernanke understands that he can prevent this Great Depression by preventing the credit supply from contracting. That's what they must do, and that's what they will do. That's what they have been doing, and that's what they're going to continue to do.
Okay, Richard Duncan, very nice to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the Business Edition. Now, when President Hu Jintao steps down from his top political job later on this year, he's going to hand over to his successor a country which boasts enviable economic growth rates, but also a growing inequality gap and social problems. John Simpson takes a look now at those who have seen little, if any, benefit of China's economic good times. They are the country's have-nots.
For all its achievements, China's leadership has failed in two major respects. The country's huge inequalities have actually got worse, and the rule of law is far too weak. A fortnight ago, this place, Shiliuzhuang in South Beijing, was a thriving suburb. Then, without warning, the bulldozers arrived. There'll be little compensation and no legal redress. Zhou Zi's lifelong home was here. He had a good job, he supported the government, and now he's lost everything. He believes it's all down to a corrupt property deal.
No one has shown us a single legal document showing they've got permission to demolish this area. All I want is a legal process.
That's all these people want too. They've come to a government office in Beijing to complain about wrongs done to them or their families by officialdom. Sometimes they get attacked or even kidnapped for coming here. Xu Yanping from Henan reported an illegal land grab by local officials. She was beaten up and her property was burned. But China's leaders have been clever. They've delegated authority for lots of things, including law enforcement, to local authorities. That way the national government avoids the blame for things that go wrong. And so these people come from all over the country asking the government for justice.
These are the details of the cases. The mere act of giving these papers to us makes them feel that they've achieved something in a society where action is extremely difficult.
Out in the countryside, this is Hunan province in southern China, things have scarcely improved at all over the last 10 years. The government has done away with some taxes, but it's still hard to make a decent living here. So there's been a big exodus to the towns. The village of Guang'an is typical. Out of a population of 1,700, around half have left to work elsewhere. The only people who live here now are the old and the very young. Jiang Chongshuo is 69. Her granddaughter, Winzia, is 9. She used to look after Winzia. Now it's the other way round. Winzia's parents are off in the town of Dongguan, 11 hours away by bus. They can only come back home to see her once a year. She misses them very much, she says. 400 miles away, Winjia's mother has come home after a long day at the factory. Winjia's father is having trouble finding work. In the tiny room they rent, we show them our pictures of Winzia. We have to do this to get the money for a better life, she says. China's years of economic success have come at a vast human cost, and many people here feel that they can't trust the system to protect them. John Simpson, BBC News, Southern China.
The worst drought in the United States for 50 years is raising fears of a food crisis. The price of corn and of soybeans has reached record highs on Thursday. As supplies continue to be hit by the blistering heat, there's little or no rain forecast until at least the end of this month. The US is the world's biggest producer of corn and a major supplier of wheat and soybeans. Here's Jeremy Howell on it.
On Steve Rauch's farm in Nevada, 70% of the corn crop has withered. There's been so little rain in this part of America's West, it's been declared a disaster area.
This year it just didn't work out. It absolutely fell apart.
The shortage of corn has pushed up the price of the crop by 55% in the past 5 weeks to its highest ever level. This affects the price of corn-based foods like sauces and taco shells, but the main impact will be on the price of feed for livestock, like cattle and poultry, and by extension on the price of meat.
The primary use of corn and soybeans is for livestock feed. Corn and soybeans are at all-time highs. That'll have flow-on effects into meat prices around the world, and it will be, I think, tragic if we start seeing those food riots again, but that remains a very real risk at this point.
There's a widespread fear that high crop prices could lead to a repeat of the riots which occurred in 2008 and 2011 in emerging countries like Somalia. With the US drought set to continue throughout the rest of the summer, it's likely those prices will stay high.
There are concerns that the rise in prices that we've seen is going to be sustained. And of course, the longer prices remain high, the more difficult it is for governments to control prices and to alleviate potential social unrest.
The United Nations has said it's concerned about rising food prices, but doesn't think things are as bad as in the years 2008 or 2011. Staple crops like rice and wheat are still fairly abundant. And many farmers may choose to slaughter their livestock rather than feeding them for any longer, which would reduce meat prices on the market. Jeremy Howell, BBC News.
Let's have a summary of some of the day's other stories. The authorities in Syria have announced that the national security chief has died of wounds from the bomb attack earlier this week. It targeted President Assad's inner circle. Meanwhile, the fighting has intensified. The government claims to have retaken the Medan area in Damascus. Rebels say that they have set fire to a military barracks in the capital. Thousands of people have been fleeing across Syria's borders to safety. The artist and leading Chinese dissident Ai Weiwei has lost his appeal against a fine of more than $2 million, which was levied on his company for tax evasion. Ai Weiwei was prevented from attending court when the verdict was delivered, but his lawyers say that he will appeal. This is the business edition coming up. After being ravaged by years of warfare, we look at plans to revive what used to be one of the biggest tourist attractions in the Middle East. Funerals have begun to take place for the Israeli victims of a bomb attack on a tourist bus in Bulgaria. 5 people were killed and at least 30 injured in a suicide attack on the Black Sea resort of Burgas on Wednesday. Israel blames Iran and the Tehran-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah for the attack, and both deny any involvement. Emergency services continue to battle wildfires that have been burning across southern Europe. Hundreds of people have had to flee their homes in parts of Greece, Portugal and Spain as flames engulfed their houses. Fanned by strong winds, the flames have spread quickly, catching many people by surprise. An investigation is underway now into how the fires started. Violent clashes have erupted in Peru as police tried to evict more than 2,500 squatters from private land. Authorities raided the 70,000 square metre lot in Lima after the squatters moved in 2 days ago. Riot police fired tear gas at the squatters. They fought back with sticks and stones. This is BBC News. I'm Jamie Robertson. This is the business edition. Spain's stock market suffers its biggest one-day fall in 2 years. Yields rise despite Eurozone finance ministers approving a bank bailout. And there are fears now of a new food crisis as corn and soybean prices in the US rise to record levels. Ever since the start of the global financial crisis, selling new shares to the public has been a pretty tough job, to say the least. Ambitious companies, and don't forget, they're equally ambitious bankers and advisors, have started out each year with great plans for initial public offerings, IPOs as they're called, only to pull them as the markets turn ugly. The latest to do so is Fender, the legendary guitar maker, which numbers Dylan and Springsteen among its clients. Now we're joined by Mark Gregory from our New York office. What did they say went wrong? Just, as I say, ugly markets.
Yes. Now, Fender announced plans to have an initial public share offering back in March when the market was rising. They clearly changed their minds, and they were still talking about their plans a week or so ago when they announced a share price, but they've now changed their minds. They cite market condition and concerns about Europe as the reason why they've pulled back. They had been hoping to raise around 400 million from the share flotation. I suppose the issue is that, well, the company said that their concern was that they wouldn't be able to get an appropriate price. So they would have been able to go ahead with the share issue, but they wouldn't have raised as much money as they wanted to raise. And it's another blow for the IPO market, of course, which is still suffering from the relative failure of Facebook's share issue. Facebook's share price, of course, fell very sharply. That's put off a lot of other companies. Fender is not a large company in economic terms, but a big brand, and the fact that they've chosen to withdraw, that's another blow for the IPO market.
So we can't even own a part of a company, let alone the actual guitars themselves. Thank you very much indeed, Mark Gregory. Some of the day's other business news now. The US industrial giant General Electric has reported net income of $3.1 billion. That's for the second quarter of 2012. That's down from $3.7 billion at the same time in 2011. However, GE's transport business grew by 58% in this quarter. It's an operation which employs some 12,000 staff worldwide, and it supplies products including engines for boats, locomotives and mining trucks. The head of Peugeot Citroën has warned that the French government criticism of its plans for 8,000 job cuts is creating a dangerous situation, as it calls it. Chairman Thierry Peugeot told French daily Le Figaro that the criticism was undermining investor confidence. President François Hollande has denounced the plans as unacceptable, and the government has criticised PSA's corporate strategy. Now, unlike most cities in the Gulf, Dubai's development has not relied on oil. It's come from building a tourism and trade hub and attracting businesses to set up shop in the desert. But the financial crash 4 years ago changed everything. Jobs were lost, office blocks started in the boom times were left half-built, struggling to find owners or tenants when the bubble burst. Simon Atkinson now reports from Dubai on how the Emirates' commercial property sector is now faring.
Now, although the skyline of Dubai has only emerged over the past couple of decades, this is surely its most recognisable feature. At more than 800 metres, the world's tallest tower, the Burj Khalifa. Now, as well as a designer hotel and hundreds of luxury apartments, there are also 37 floors of office space. But while it might seem like a magnificent place to go to work each morning, not many people have that opportunity. And that is because almost 2/3 of those offices are still lying empty.
The skyscraper opened to great razzmatazz in 2010, just weeks after the Emirates' financial crisis.
The tallest building, obviously.
And even though the economy's picked up, property experts like Alan say its offices are part empty because they don't meet the needs of companies setting up or expanding here.
It's a global icon and it's a fantastic and prestigious address, but that's not the kind of image a lot of the multinational corporates want to portray these days.
These workers are laying roads that'll serve the offices as well as shops and apartments. And the firm's boss says infrastructure's key to luring clients.
A lot of international companies do come to Dubai, and most of these do require certain setups, and these setups do require excellent infrastructure for two reasons. One, for them to set up immediately and do business, and the second, for the good of their people.
And there could soon be more of those people. A report out this week by Merrill Lynch suggested Dubai's population could double in the next decade. And that'd bode well for office buildings new and old, provided they measured up to expectations.
Well, for more of Simon's report and other business stories from around the region, you can watch Middle East Business Report on BBC World News on Friday, 19:30 GMT, and Saturday, 22:30 GMT. Now, as countries recover from war and economic collapse, there are certain signs that show progress is being made. The rule of law, obvious one, the establishment of courts, free press, functioning service sector, and one symptom of returning employment, the ability for people to take holidays. It does seem to be happening in Iraq. The problem is that many of these people are perhaps expecting a little bit more than the country can provide. Al-Habinya, it is true, has known better times. It's built on a lake, it stores billions of cubic metres of water, all from the Euphrates River. Times it's been considered the biggest holiday resort in the Middle East, with a first-class 6-floor hotels, 500 chalets, tennis courts, volleyball courts, archery fields, swimming pools, playgrounds, you name it. Not today, though. The resort used, of course, to be the playground of the Ba'ath Party elite. Saddam Hussein frequented it Yeah, the war ruined everything. It was effectively turned into a refugee camp. However, there are plans afoot.
No umbrellas, no tents, no nothing, no natural scenery. There is nothing. You can see it is so dirty. There is no care and no municipality services, no supervision and no one to instruct people. There are no garbage containers for people to put trash in. Nothing is good. We bring our food as well as water with us because they are sold at more than 3 or 4 times their prices. And we bring bread, so we do not need anyone here. We also bring tents and mats to sit on.
There's one distinctly dissatisfied customer. However, as I said, there are some plans that things might get better.
A contract has been signed with an investment company, namely the Turkish Embassy Company, to rehabilitate and renovate large parts of the city, including the hotel, the cottages, as well as the beach, the amusement park and boat anchors. Work will be completed by the end of the year 2013, God willing. In the coming year, we expect, by God's will, to achieve a big stride forward in the tourism and recreational fields.
Well, actually, Iraq is a potential tourist hotspot. It's got thousands of internationally recognised archaeological sites. Believe it or not, foreign tourists have actually been making their way in dribs and drabs to Kurdish Iraq since 2007. Problems of the country, they're very basic, until somewhere like Habinia can avoid power outages, for instance, for up to 5 to 6 hours a day. Locals may go there because they can't go anywhere else. Precious few others will join them. Quick look at the markets. I'm afraid it's all looking a little bit negative. There's the Dow down about 1%, as are the other markets. Actually, Nasdaq's down even more. European markets all hated it as well, and it's all because of Spain and the European crisis, I'm afraid. And that's all we got time for. Thanks for joining us on Business Edition. We'll be back again on Monday.
The remnants of the tropical storm that swept across South and North Korea is just about still in evidence. It continues to move away to the northeast, taking its rain with it. The wind's not really an issue, but it's the tail end of that system which moves across the Sea of Japan into Japan itself, and that is going to bring some pretty heavy showers.